Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating piece of history, the events at Bougafer back in 1933. It's a powerful story of resistance.
It really is. And the source material we have paints such a vivid picture. I mean, straight away, you're hit by the sheer intensity of it all.
Yeah, that time frame, 42 days.
42 days, yeah. From mid-February to late April 1933, constant bombardment day and night, artillery, aircraft, just relentless.
It's hard to even imagine. The conditions must have been, well, just horrific.
Absolutely. The text mentions lack of sleep, lack of water, livestock dying, the dead just
Yeah.
grim.
It really sets a stark scene, doesn't it? And it
Yep.
makes the negotiations that eventually happened even more remarkable.
Exactly. And that's really our focus today, isn't it? Understanding those key moments, especially from the perspective of Assou Oubaslam and the Atida Ada.
Right, and figuring out how they reached that pretty surprising outcome given the circumstances.
Definitely surprising. So where should we start? The initial negotiation attempt.
Yeah, let's dive in there. So General Giraud arrives, and he demands the Ayadada perform Tagursa. Can you unpack that a bit? What did that demand really signify?
Well, Tagursa is this traditional ritual. It involves an animal sacrifice, usually as a plea for protection, a way of seeking mercy or favor.
So Giraud demanding it was basically him saying, submit. Show me you're asking for French protection according to your own customs.
Precisely. It was loaded with symbolism, a demand for public ritualistic submission.
Okay, which makes Assou Oubaslam's response just incredible.
Oh, absolutely. The source gives us his exact words, roughly translated.
He says, if you demand a sacrifice, we will sacrifice a dog.
Mekcham Tagursa. I don't negrasi igdigdi. I mean, the sheer audacity.
It's more than just saying no, isn't it? It's a deliberate, cutting insult, using a dog considered unclean for a sacred ritual.
It completely undermines Giraud's authority and the entire basis of his demand. And then what does he do?
He just refuses to talk to Giraud anymore.
Yeah.
Flat out.
Says he'll only deal with General Houret.
Which tells you something about his strategic thinking, right? He's already assessing the players.
He must have been. He clearly didn't see Giraud as someone he could negotiate honorably with after that demand. He wanted someone else, maybe someone he perceived as having higher authority or perhaps a different approach.
So the next day, the negotiations actually happen, but with General Houret, who'd taken over command down at Boumelin.
Right. And the source describes the scene as émouvant, moving, emotional, a different tone, perhaps.
Maybe a sense of gravity, or perhaps relief that talks were even happening after that initial clash.
Could be. And then Assou Oubaslam lays out his conditions, and this is where it gets really extraordinary.
Yeah, the list is quite something. Let's go through them. First off, no victor, no vanquished.
Which is huge, right? After 42 days of being bombarded, to demand parity, mutual respect, essentially?
Absolutely. Then they would not be under the orders of Pasha Glaoui.
Big point. Glaoui was a major regional power figure, often allied with the French. So this is about autonomy from local collaborators, too.
And crucially, they'd govern themselves according to their own ASREF, their customary law.
That's fundamental. Preserving their own legal and social structures, not having French or Glaoui administration imposed.
Okay, what else? No Ayat Ada women required at French festivities.
Yes. No forcing women to attend events held by the Rumi, the French, the Europeans, a protection of their women and social integrity.
And no forced labor, the corvée.
Also significant, avoiding that common colonial practice.
Plus exemption from the tertib tax.
Right, another assertion of their independence from the colonial fiscal system.
And maybe the most striking for a group that just endured a siege. They kept their weapons.
They kept their weapons and a general amnesty for everything that happened during the battle.
It's almost hard to believe Houret agreed to all that.
It really is. It speaks volumes about Assou Oubaslam's strength in negotiation and maybe the French desire to just end this incredibly costly resistance. It preserved the Aidada's honor, their autonomy, their way of life, fundamentally.
Okay, so that's the negotiation outcome, which is remarkable in itself. But we also have this other piece, this amaze poem, from someone who was actually in the battle.
Yes, and this gives you such a different perspective. Raw, personal, visceral. It's not about the high-level talks. It's about the experience on the ground.
It starts, I endured Bougafer. It was Paulin's battle. Who was Paulin?
Seems he was a French officer, apparently deeply hated. A symbol of the oppression they felt they were fighting against. It personalizes the conflict immediately.
And the next line. I wanted to push back the Rumi so he wouldn't reach us.
Hmm.
Just a clear statement of defense.
Exactly. Defending their land, their community. Then it gets into the technology gap.
I took my bayonet rifle. He was shooting at us with a machine gun.
A stark contrast in firepower.
And when he fired shells, I lost my boldness.
That line is so powerful. That admission of fear, of being overwhelmed by the sheer force of modern artillery, it's incredibly honest.
It really brings home what that 42-day bombardment must have felt like.
Mm-hmm. And the imagery later. Water mixed with blood in the springs.
God, yeah. And my eye wept like a downpour.
Just pure grief and loss. It really grounds those negotiated terms, doesn't it? That no victor, no vanquished feels earned after hearing that.
Absolutely. It adds that essential human layer.
Hmm.
Now, shifting focus slightly, the source also talks quite a bit about a specific French figure, Captain de Bournazel.
Ah, yes, the Red Man. He seems to have become this larger-than-life figure, almost mythical.
Why the red?
His uniform. He wore his distinctive red Spahi cavalry uniform from previous service in Algeria. It made him stand out, instantly recognizable.
And apparently utterly fearless, always first into the attack.
That's the reputation, yes. Which, combined with the uniform, led to this aura. Some locals apparently even thought he had magical protection. He was deeply feared.
But his story ends at Bougafer. He was killed near Teslet-Nimzi, Little Goat Peak.
That's right, also called Peten 5 in some accounts, killed on February 28, 1933.
And here's where it gets murky, right? There isn't one clear story about who killed him.
No, the local oral traditions differ. One names a man called Ahekchak from Ekich,
Another says Shane Oskov from Willen.
and a third points to the Oubaslam family, specifically someone named Lassen and Oubaslam, also known as Basu.
So, multiple claims or multiple stories circulating, what does that usually signify?
It often means the event was incredibly significant. Killing Bournazel was a major symbolic victory, a blow against this figure of French power. Some maybe different groups or individuals wanted to claim or were credited with that act.
And we actually have verses composed about one of those potential figures, Ashok.
Yes, which again give us insight into the sentiment at the time. The reverence for him is immediate, saying he deserves a shrine.
And the description of the act itself is very precise. The shot hit Bournazel between the two eyes.
A very clear, definitive image, no ambiguity there.
But then the language turns towards Bournazel. Deserves that we cauterize his heart with sulfur. Wow. Yeah, intense hatred. Deserves to fall into a well of 70 meters and never come out. Why such specific hatred? The verses mention him killing women and livestock.
It seems he was seen as particularly brutal, directly responsible for the suffering mentioned in the other poem too, the loss of life, the destruction of livelihoods.
And there's that defiance again, linking back to the negotiations almost. Better to die than to address greetings to Glaoui.
Absolutely. Consistent resistance against both French and collaborating local powers, the warrior spirit. He wants paradise, not submission.
And then those incredibly sad final lines about his children being left orphans.
It brings it right back to the human cost, doesn't it? Even in celebrating a victory like killing Bournazel, the personal tragedy is right there.
So looking at all these pieces together, the high-stakes negotiation, the poem's raw emotion, the legend and mystery around Bournazel's death. What picture emerges for you?
I think you get a much fuller sense of Bougafer. It wasn't just a battle report or a treaty signing. It was this complex event shaped by incredible resilience, strategic thinking from leaders like Assou Oubaslam.
The sheer terror and bravery of ordinary fighters.
And these symbolic moments like the insult to Giraud or the death of Bournazel, that became embedded in collective memory.
The negotiation outcome, preserving their autonomy against such odds, is really the central pillar, maybe.
It feels like it. But the poem and the Bournazel stories show you why that outcome was so fiercely fought for and what the human stakes really were. It all connects.
So wrapping this up then, we've seen the Atet Ada, under immense pressure, secure these really quite incredible terms, keeping their autonomy, their laws, their weapons.
We felt the human cost through that combatant's visceral poem.
And we've looked at how a key opposing figure, Bournazel, became this legendary feared character whose death is still debated in local memory.
Which leaves us with a final thought, perhaps. How does the memory of an event like this, the specific terms won, the poems sung, the stories told about who shot who, how does that shape a community's identity going forward?
Yeah, what does it tell us about how resistance is remembered and how complex these historical narratives always are? It wasn't a simple story then, and the way it's remembered isn't simple now.
Exactly. It shows the power of holding on to your narrative, your terms, even after the fighting stops.
Definitely something to think about. We hope you found this deep dive into Bougafer insightful. Thanks for joining us.